Hi, everybody. Welcome to this month's Community Venue Learning Series. For those of you who don't know about these webinars, these are free to empower, equip, and encourage those involved in community venues. And a warm welcome to everyone who's joined, especially if you're new, and those who are actually watching this after the fact. So my name is Shana, and I am part of the marketing team at SpacetoCo. And SpacetoCo's mission is to help make communities more sustainable, drive growth into local economies, and facilitate community connection, primarily through an efficient venue booking system and a two-sided marketplace. And so that means we've worked with a lot of community venues across Australia and New Zealand, and we found that there are very unique challenges that community venues face. And so we thought we'd love to connect everyone together and talk about topics that actually matter to them. Hence, the series was born. This month's webinar is all about how to recruit, retain, and take care of volunteers, which is quite an important topic for community venues. And I'm super excited about our experts who are joining us today. Peter Parry from Student Volunteer Army and Chantelle, Cobby from the Microvolunteering Collective. As you all know, volunteers are a massive part of community venue life, whether you employ them or you're a volunteer yourself. So it's really important to know how to look after these MVPs. Also, the landscape of volunteering has probably changed a little bit post-COVID. So even if you've been doing a lot of volunteer care or have been sort of in that field, it's probably a good time to gain a little bit of a refresher. Finally, on our side of SpacetoCo, we offer a lot of free resources for community venues, and we found that our volunteer checklist has been probably the most downloaded resource. So we thought this is probably a good topic to delve into. So we'll look into the agenda of the session today. So I am Shana, doing the welcome introduction. Then I'll pass it on to my colleague, Carmela, who sort out an icebreaker. Then we'll hear from Peter and then Chantelle. And there's a little bit of space for Q&A at the end. So if you do have questions, feel free to write them up in your chat. So on the bottom right corner of your browser, there's a chat button. And I see other people have already said hello. Hello to Tegan, Ian, Pauline, and Carmela. So I will pass it on to Carmela to do the little icebreaker.
Sweet. Hi, everybody. As Shana said, my name is Carmela, and I work with her under the marketing team, and I head a lot of the social media. And actually, I am the one who usually runs the community venue learning series, but Shana's been so cool in stepping in for this month. And we're so excited to get to know so much more about our speakers for today, but also all the experiences that they have to share with us. Just to break the ice, we just wanted to know if you haven't already introduced yourself, your name, where you're from, probably what community venue you run, or if you're not running a community venue, what do you do for work? What made you interested in this topic for today? And maybe what kind of volunteering experience have you had in the past, and what are you wanting to learn from this session, just so that we get a gauge as to what questions you might have for our speakers and what specifically you'd like to learn. I know for me, I've had a lot of volunteering experience with young people, with youth, in the youth space, in particular in churches and Christian communities. It's really interesting to know that there are different dynamics that hop on into that. And so I'd love to learn so much more about the micro-volunteering. When Shauna told me about it, like, I've never heard about it. So that's been cool. Plus also the Student Volunteer Army as well, through the crises that have been happening in New Zealand. Different dynamics there as well. So I'll give people some time to type it up on the chat. Again, if you haven't found the chat button, it's at the bottom tab that just says chat. It'll open up and you'll see everybody who's been introducing themselves. We have Tegan who says, hi. We have Tegan from SpacetoCo. Love hearing about our volunteers' work as it helps me understand how I can help them achieve their goals and alleviate some of the pressure of their admin work through using SpacetoCo. That is right. I think that's really cool that even like us at SpacetoCo, even though we host this, there's so much that we would love to learn as well. We tap onto so many speakers, so many workshop presenters, and so it'll be cool to see even I think the things that I know I've struggled with in the past is even like showing appreciation to volunteers. Like, how do you do it, especially with a budget or if you don't even have a budget? Shana as well from SpacetoCo said, keen to know what the future of volunteering looks like, especially with tech being a big part of our life now. And yes, that is really important. And I think, yeah, tech has like a big role in the space that we work we work at. So that would be cool to learn from. Ian, he looks after Victoria in the land of Australia. Hello, Ian. He currently volunteers at 2 sports clubs, helping with coaching for cricket and soccer. That's cool. I love giving back and helping youngsters with their sports skills. That's awesome. See, even in a capacity with our local communities, we're always somewhat like being involved in some way. Tegan again, I also used to do volunteering work for the Cardiff Junior Football Club running their canteen. Oh man, that's awesome. Ian from Wellington Competitive Bowlers. Hi, Ian from Wellington, 10-pin bowling. He doesn't run a venue, but helps ideas to recruit and maintain volunteers. So that's what Ian from Wellington would like to know, is how to help get ideas to recruit and maintain volunteers. And Ian, hopefully we can get a lot of that ideas in this session. So thank you so much for tuning in. And there are others tuned in as well. And for those people who are also not tuned in but are watching this session, hello and welcome. We have Pauline from SpacetoCo who said she's keen to learn more about volunteering options when people have a small amount of time. Yes, that is also the key with volunteers, is the limitations that they may have with their time. So how can we better utilize that in a way where they feel appreciated as well? So thank you so much, guys. This is heaps. It's really cool to see that there's a variety of experiences of volunteering, whether in the workplace or even in our local communities and family and homes. And so I think the things that we're going to be learning about this session will be very beneficial for all of us. So I'll pass it back to Shana so that we can get started.
Thanks, heaps, Carmela, and thanks everybody for joining in. And keep I think introducing yourself. This chat will be on for the whole session. And if you have any questions throughout the session, feel free to put them up on the chat as well. I'm really, really excited to introduce our first speaker. His name is Peter Parry, and he looks after crisis management for the Student Volunteer Army. You might have heard about them, especially if you live in New Zealand. We actually spoke a little bit yesterday, doing a little run through, and I found out that he's only been in New Zealand for a few months. So welcome. And he's only seen Auckland through the floods. So hopefully you get to see a little bit more of Auckland post-flood.
Fingers crossed.
He's got amazing insights on the landscape of volunteering, especially with youth. And so it'd be really awesome to hear all of that. So welcome, Peter.
Thanks very much. Just to give a bit more of a background. So like Shana said, I've only been in New Zealand since the middle of January. I got involved with SVA from February and took on their crisis response for the Auckland floods and Cyclone Gabrielle. And then we also had another incident last week, or the week before, just to add insult to injury there. So it's been very busy, and that coming from a contrast of having been involved with voluntary search and rescue teams back in the UK for the last 10 years or so. We would generally go 4 or 5 years without actually attending anything. So it's quite the contrast to come and do a role and then attend 3 separate incidents in the space of about a month or 2. So it's been quite the contrast. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity and looking forward to share. And please, anyone who has any questions moving through, pump it in the chat, and I'll try and roll around some of those as I go through. I think I kind of mainly wanted to open up and just say that, especially with an introduction so fabulous and reference as an expert on the topic, I think it's really important to acknowledge for most of you out there that I don't think any organization, any nonprofit organization would say that they have volunteer recruitment and retainment down to a fine art. I think even if you do, I think it then changes with changing generations, changing focuses, different things in the political landscape, that kind of thing. So I think it's kind of a constant source of want for an improvement. And we here at SVA are certainly in the same position of there's always ways to do it better, and we're always wanting to do things but short on time. So just trying to kind of roll through with what we can. Hopefully today will maybe give you an idea of some of the things that we've done and some of the things that I've done previously that just maybe might be new, or give you some confidence to try the idea that you've had before, and go from there. So Shana's in control of the PowerPoint, so I'm going to have to do Shana, next slide, please. And we can probably roll through to the next one as well. So I wanted to kind of start with when I came to New Zealand, I wanted to test my knowledge of the volunteer base here and just try and cut the learning curve on how different the volunteer base might be from back in the UK. So there's some wonderful statistics and data out there. And so hopefully I won't bore the kind of statistic phobes out there, but I'm a very data-driven person. So I think it helps to demonstrate when you're looking at volunteering, recruiting different volunteers, what's out there, kind of what's a realistic goal, what does a typical volunteer in New Zealand look like in terms of demographic and profile and kind of age and everything else. And so I thought it'd be useful to start with a bit of a look at how many people are out there to kind of choose from. So there's some references at the bottom for where these reports came from, but most of the research has been conducted by Volunteering New Zealand. And their survey, one of their most recent surveys, was started with, have you volunteered in the last 4 weeks? And only 50% of Kiwis said that they'd volunteered in the last 4 weeks. So I kind of view it as there's almost 2 profiles of people out there. There's those who volunteer and those who don't. And sometimes it's helpful to know that there's kind of only about 50-50. And so Shana, if you'll roll through, thank you. Then once you've got your 50% of volunteers, so these kind of figures here give you an idea of that volunteer base, those people who have volunteered in the last 4 weeks. Of those people that have volunteered in the last 4 weeks, 80% of them volunteered locally. So if you're in a particularly kind of loosely populated area, it is going to be that bit more challenging for you to find people, just because you are restricted to your local area generally as the vast majority. But you do also get some reinforcement that there is a fifth of volunteers out there that will travel a little bit further. As a male in the volunteer space, I've always found that there's often a perception that the volunteering's female heavy, but the stats here are pretty even. So there's generally a room for error on all of these stats of kind of a couple of percent either way. So it's pretty close to 50-50. Then age-wise, here at SVA, we really like to champion these kind of stats as well. So there's a big focus and narrative a lot of the time in the press around kind of Gen Z and Gen X coming through and not being active volunteers or not being as heavily participating in kind of local community. But generally speaking, the statistics do differ from that and do kind of paint a different picture. The thing that we try to really advocate for here, and what we kind of find is maybe helps articulate the difference, is younger volunteers generally want to volunteer the way they want to volunteer. So it's very much a case of kind of, if they want to help, how would you like to help, and trying to facilitate that rather than advertising roles and trying to recruit young people into those specific job types. So often if you're struggling to find young people kind of filling up the ranks coming in through the bottom, it might be just a case of looking at those kind of roles and whether they're driving how that looks or whether you're driving it kind of backwards. So whittling down from that, this gives you an idea of how much time each volunteer gives. So the vast majority of people kind of give under that 10, 15 hours mark every 4 weeks. But you do have a good chunk that are giving considerably more than that. So 25 or more hours in a 4-week period, kind of a fifth of your volunteers are doing that. So I imagine with the community venues is often very weighted towards trying to get regular volunteers in, kind of on having a regular person that comes on a particular time slot on a Monday afternoon and then on a Tuesday, et cetera, et cetera. If you're struggling to fill those slots, it might just be a case of opening that pool of people and just having a bit more of an ad hoc rota together. So there's a lot of ways of juggling that kind of information and trying to fill those rota slots to make your life a little bit easier. There's a lot of online kind of form platforms and things where you can get people to submit their availability and then assign things backwards. We've done that quite a lot here when we're trying to kind of fill admin roles or there's a particular kind of stock take needed. We'll try and push it the other way around rather than saying, we need someone to come in on Sunday afternoon to do this between the hours of 2 and 4. We turn around and say, we need someone to do this task. If someone's willing, when would you be free to over the next few weeks? And then try and find a time that's convenient for both of us the other way around. So the other thing that was really, really important to pull out of these big stats and documents, I think, is 30% of those people that have volunteered for an organization. So the other 70% of that group, of that volunteer base, are volunteering towards an individual. So, for example, it might be helping an elderly person in their community do their grocery shopping, or helping someone with a disability to go out and go to a music concert or something like that. So it's more of an informal volunteering opportunity. So actually what most organizations, I would imagine, within this group are offering is considerably the minority of the amount of time that people are actually spending doing their volunteering. There's not so much necessarily a big change that we can kind of approach to that, but it's, I think, helpful to just have an idea of actually what we offer as organizations towards volunteers is actually the minority of the amount of time people are volunteering elsewhere. Okay, so we've discussed the 50% who have volunteered regularly in the last few weeks or so. This is the 50% who haven't volunteered in the last 4 weeks. So moving on to the next one, Shana, if you can. Thanks. So of this, 48% of the ones who wouldn't normally volunteer or haven't volunteered in the last 4 weeks, there is nothing you can do to get them involved, according to them. So when surveyed about what would change your mind and get you involved in volunteering, 48% of the ones who haven't volunteered in the last 4 weeks said absolutely nothing. So we've already whittled that group down to 24% of the population. So at the bottom, this is kind of a running counter of what's left, of what we can try and convert from those that haven't already volunteered. So Shana, thank you. So then 45% of the ones left said that they don't have enough time. So now we're down to 11% in total. And then, yeah, so we're looking at pretty much 11% of the population that you can actually turn from not being a volunteer into a volunteer, even with the best recruitment structure in the world. So personally, I kind of take this and interpret this as a way of, I try to focus our mechanisms around getting existing volunteers to kind of do some extra hours or volunteer more, or for them to try and pull in friends and family and their own contacts. Generally speaking, that group of people that don't actively seek or aren't open to volunteering, for me, I interpret this as it's kind of your time is best spent on the others. Just trying to flick through and see if there's anything that I missed in there. The other thing that I think was interesting out of this was the more qualified an individual is, the more likely they are to volunteer. So I think I've always certainly held the predisposition that someone who's an executive in a business or is maybe an academic at a university or something like that, who has potentially a slightly more higher pressure role that absorbs a lot of their out of hours time, would be less inclined to volunteer. But actually the research into it shows us that the more qualified someone is, the more likely they are to volunteer. The differences aren't huge at the end of the day, but I think, again, it's just kind of debunking some of those preconceptions that maybe you got, those busy business people aren't worth approaching because they'll never volunteer because they've never got time. It's just trying to work those back. And the other one is employed versus unemployed. So there's a negligible difference between participation in volunteering from those that are employed versus those that aren't. The big difference is those that aren't in the workforce. So, for example, those people who are retired or post that employment age, those numbers do shoot up quite dramatically. And often that compensates for the difference in ages. And so why that older age group often has a slightly higher volunteering percentage. But generally speaking, those batches, those numbers are pretty similar throughout the age groups. Thanks, Shanna. So then this for me is kind of my approach to any kind of volunteer recruitment or volunteering engagement. I think this principle just overrides everything. For me, it always comes back to purpose. So in everything that you do, in every touch point that you have with volunteers, lead with your purpose. Your organization exists. Someone started it. You might have started it. You started it for a reason. It exists to solve something in your community that you see as a big issue. Chances are you're not alone in that thought. The main reason why people will get involved is because they agree and identify with the values of your organization or the purpose of what you're trying to solve. So this, for me, comes back to when you advertise, when you send out newsletters, when you even just send a Facebook Messenger message or something, or a text message to someone saying, any chance you can come in next Tuesday, try and link it back to your purpose. So can you come in next Tuesday? We're going to do this. It's going to have this kind of impact on the people that we help, and that would be down to you. Always try and bring it back. So I think this kind of leads us into the why people volunteer. So one more for me, Shana. Thanks. So just throw in here, some of you might come across an individual called Simon Sinek. He's quite an internationally renowned speaker around leadership. He often talks about business, but I think at the end of the day, I choose to look at recruiting volunteers very similarly to how a business would recruit customers. I think most of the principles are still the same. I actually think in a lot of ways, it's easier to get someone to part with their cash than it is to part with their time. So in some respects, you've actually got a harder job to get someone to come in and volunteer than you would be if you were selling them something. So Simon's one of the most popular TED Talks that's ever hit the internet, was the reason why, and this phrase of people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So I really recommend to go and have a look at it if you've not seen it before. It's quite an inspirational video, quite moving, but it really does articulate far better than I could right now some justification behind my theory of why. Thanks, Shana. Thank you. Okay, so going back to the stats just a little bit more, this is the last one, I think. The reasons why people volunteer, a lot of people get caught up, especially with young people volunteering around, it's all about people volunteer to get into the workplace. Whenever you see adverts for people who are unemployed or looking to upscale their roles, they're always signposted to volunteering. But actually, the number of people who volunteer for employment is very low. I think it's 10% on here. To gain work experience, 6%. Enhance my CV, 8%. So even if you combine those, that's 14%. It's also interesting to add to this that these aren't mutually exclusive. So if someone said, I volunteer to give back, they might have also ticked to enhance my CV. It's not one versus the other. It's potentially a combination of things. So people don't even see that as a major benefit of why they're volunteering in the first place. It is overwhelmingly 90% to give back. So just to kind of back up what I've been saying in terms of the why and focusing on your why, that is why people volunteer. Thank you. So this is just a quick example of a recruitment advert I actually didn't have to go very far to find this. This was the first advert I found on the first platform that I looked on, someone advertising a volunteer role. I'll just give you a second to read it. So I don't know about you, but I'm not giving up my time to do this. This when I read it through, my immediate takeaway was that someone's expecting me to come forwards and offer up my time for very little involvement, very little camera. There's other things to pull out of this. There's nothing about the organization itself and what the organization does. It didn't take me much to kind of redact this. It's just the name of the account holder. It's very vague around exactly what you want to do, and it's very much on their terms. It's very much, you need to do this way. So even if I'm potentially the best graphic designer and I can use Photoshop and some really advanced editing, you're telling me I've got to do it your way, which I don't want to. And what if I've never used Canva before, but I want to use Canva? Canva, for those that might not know, is just an editing platform online. It's just a software platform. And it's very much you can do for us, and it's not very collaborative. So before Shana moves on to the next slide, I want to stress my example next is not a perfect example of a recruitment advert. It's just how, if I was to rewrite this advert, this is how I would do it. So if it was for us, I'd be starting again with our purpose first. So initially I'd talk about what we are as an organization, why we do what we do, and then moving on to, more importantly, how this role fits into those goals. How you as an individual, if you came and volunteered your time, you'd be pushing towards those goals and making lives better for young people in New Zealand. A big one as well, and this comes in the job market, and it's definitely something that I've noticed between New Zealand and the UK, is the transparency of those kind of adverts. So there's a big push around advertising salary and things like that in advance. I think with volunteering, it's almost more important to be transparent because people's time is very precious. You don't want to spend loads of time looking through adverts if that role isn't going to work for you. So if you can't find enough information about how the role works and how long you'd need to give your time for, what the start date might be of when you'd need to come through, you're not going to spend as much time following it through and seeing it through. But if you know from the jump that this advert fits all of your criteria around how you might want to volunteer and how that fits into your life, then you're more likely to put that time in and see it all the way through. I also think that that kind of application anxiety as well around what happens once you press apply is really important. So some idea of how the process works once you hit apply, I think is also really useful. And sorry, I just missed on there in terms of the highlights of, so in here, I was just pushing as well. If there's something that your role, you can offer the volunteer in that role. So in this one, as an example, potentially teaching them how to use Canva, which might be of a benefit to them professionally or as a student or something like that going into the workplace, is always a really nice perk as well. Sometimes it's not going to be possible, but if it is there, then great. So now you've got your advert, it's where to advertise. So for us, we actually have our own app, the SVA app, which I'll go on to in a little bit more detail in a second. But there are also regional volunteer centres in every region of New Zealand. There's different price structures and different setups depending on where you are. Most of them, if you're a small community organisation without significant turnover, most of them are free to use. The other one is Seek, which is also free to use here in New Zealand and is quite comprehensive. And even a lot of the governmental platforms on volunteering and things like careers advisors in schools and things like that push you towards these platforms to search for volunteer roles. They slightly cater to different things. So the volunteer centres are often a bit better for a specific role where you're coming back again and again with kind of a specific skill set. And Seek's maybe a bit more focused on ad hoc volunteering, but that as well. But yeah, you will find that they do work slightly differently in each region and for different roles. There are also, if you go onto the Volunteering New Zealand website, there's a whole host of platforms. In the last slide of the presentation here, I've also done the links for each one, just in case it's of use to go and find out where you can advertise. I've mainly focused on the digital advertising of roles, just because the vast majority of volunteers find their roles through either a digital source or through word of mouth. Generally speaking, in my experience, most community organizations are pretty good at the word of mouth side of things. There are definitely steps and strategies you can take to improve that, but often the space that kind of is the most intimidating, or you can find the kind of biggest improvements, is just on the digital space. So that's just why I've focused on that a little bit more. Thanks, Shanna. So just a little bit more about SVA. So we actually operate our own volunteer opportunity platform, which is targeted at young people under the age of 18. We offer a service, or a product called the Service Award. The idea is around enabling young people to volunteer in their local community as much as possible, and to kind of give positive reinforcement to those that do. That's fine, Shana, you can scroll through these just as we go. As you can see, we're kind of spread all over New Zealand. So by registering onto our platform and advertising on our platform, you can advertise a volunteering opportunity to students in your area, where they can tick and sign up to come down. And the way that it works is based on the number of hours that you give and volunteer for, they get provided and awarded badges in their assemblies. And so the idea is to really kind of increase that positive reinforcement around the ones that are volunteering. It's a fairly simple platform for the students to use and to find kind of customized opportunities for them. A big one in terms of questions that we get a lot here around youth volunteering is kind of ways to make your volunteering opportunities more accessible. There's no real big secret behind this. It's often some of the really obvious common sense stuff that doesn't really sink through when you think about your typical volunteer base. It's things like making it outside of school hours, making it aware in the job adverts that people under 18 can join. And then often there's quite a lot of social anxiety for them to join in. I think it approaches for adults just as much as young people as well. If you can introduce things like touch points over the phone before someone arrives, knowing that person's going to be there when you turn up, I think it always makes a really big impact. But anyone can advertise on our app. They just have to get in touch, and we just create an agreement around what you're going to use it for, what kind of activities are going to go on there, but it's available to anyone. So once they're kind of signed up, that volunteer journey, I think, is the next kind of big step in that. I'm just a bit conscious of time, so I'm going to kind of whittle through these a little bit quickly. So the volunteer journey is just trying to make sure you can shorten that as quickly as possible. So you don't want someone to register their interest and then not hear back from you for 2 weeks, because you might have missed your chance to really convert that person. So try and think about your systems, think about, are they repeating information that they're submitting again and again, and how quickly you can turn that around. And then I think the next one is that first day is just trying to make sure that first touch where they get involved with you is as beneficial as possible. So maybe making sure that they're not doing tasks on their own, and that they're paired up with another individual, kind of touching into the retention space here as well. Schemes where you, for example, give like a mentor volunteer. So you've got a new volunteer coming in, you pair them up with someone who volunteered with you a lot before, and so that they've got that kind of support network and can have a little bit more of a one-to-one touch, especially if you're short on time. I've seen to work really well in the past, especially with sports clubs. You can often find like if you go up to the first day and no one comes up to you and you don't really learn anyone's name, and you leave thinking, would anyone really have cared if I wasn't there? I think is kind of the worst thing you want. So you want to try and make sure that on a scalable level, you have a system in place to try and make sure that doesn't happen. And so sometimes just dictating or telling and tasking one of your other volunteers with that just helps to save you the effort. Mostly, I think that in terms of the retention piece, it's around just building that community, is building opportunities for people to socialize, offering as much flexibility as you can so people can fit around busy lives, offering them a choice so that they can volunteer in the way that works for them at the times that works for them, maybe remotely, maybe in smaller segments, coming back kind of multiple days for shorter periods of time, or for a big chunk in one go on one day rather than multiple days. and just being clear and making sure that what you're asking of them, they know up front, and there's no ambiguity around, am I doing the right thing? Am I actually helping? I'm not quite sure what to do, because sometimes that can alienate very, very quickly. I'm sorry, I've gone a bit over. There's probably some bits in there that might have been glazed over, but just some links for you if you want to find some of those platforms to advertise and things like that.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was a lot of awesome information. It's just like things that I didn't even know as well. And it's really cool that you based your presentation on what volunteers need, or like what would they want to do in terms of volunteering themselves, as opposed to this is what you do and that kind of thing. And so it comes back to that purpose-driven thing. And I will be sure to put that YouTube link of Simon Sinek's TED Talk. I've seen it before, and I think it's like useful across the board in a lot of like industries as well. So thank you again, Peter. I've written down a lot of questions as well, but I will move on to our second speaker. We've got Chantelle, Cobby, who is the founder of the Microvolunteering Collective. And I heard about the Microvolunteering Collective when I was studying at the University of Waikato in Hamilton, on New Zealand. And this group was based there, and I was like, what is microvolunteering? It was a very interesting concept to me. And so I think it might be game-changing for anybody who is watching this, especially in the community venue space. So welcome, Chantelle.
Thank you so much. Game-changing, no pressure now. No, fantastic to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And thank you, Peter, for providing such a wonderful kind of overview of the volunteer landscape. Thank you. So one thing that I'm very passionate about is this concept of microvolunteering. And I truly believe that micro moments have the power to fuel macro change. So if you'll come with me and travel back in time a little bit, I'd love to tell you a story of what that actually means and what that looks like. So I was lucky to grow up in a family where volunteering and giving back to our community was just a part of who we were as a family. And I found myself immersed in the community from a very young age. I don't know if anyone remembers those little mobile libraries that would drive around town, but I'd jump on board mine every couple of weeks and help sort the books. And I'd head along to a local rest home quite often and read them books and in exchange learn lessons from their life. And that all continued throughout my childhood until I went to university. And I found that I just couldn't kind of volunteer in the way that I always had. I wanted to volunteer, but I found that there were many barriers in my way. My time was limited. I was trying to balance part-time work with study. Transportation options were a little bit more restricted than they had been in the past. And I found that when I talked to others around me, actually, this challenge was not unique to me at all. There were so many of us who were ready and willing and keen to engage, but there just seemed to be a bit of a gap between what we could offer and what volunteer organisations were looking for. So, of course, my response was to head to Google and see what the internet had to say about that. And that's where I came across the concept of microvolunteering. Not sure if anyone's already familiar with it. We tend to find it's quite a new concept for most people. But if we can pop to the next slide, I've got a definition there of microvolunteering, and that is that it is any easy, low cost, no commitment volunteer action that typically takes less than 30 minutes to complete. So essentially, microvolunteering takes the idea that huge impact can collectively be created when a group of people unite together to do a little bit of good, and it turns this into a new approach to community action. Really, it's all about breaking down some of the barriers that can exist to more traditional forms of volunteering. And it's about empowering people, regardless of their age, their gender, their background, or their experience, to make a difference in their community through bite-sized volunteer tasks. So I thought this was a pretty cool concept and decided to test it out by creating an on-campus club, as Shana mentioned, called the Microvolunteering Collective. And our goal was to bring students together through a series of events, activities, and campaigns, and empower them to use their skills, strengths, and creativity to make a difference in their community. Now, that was all in February 2019 when we got started. And since then, we've become a charitable trust and have empowered over 2,000 people throughout the country to offer up 1,800 hours of their time to a whole range of community causes. Now, there are many wonderful examples of microvolunteering from around New Zealand and from around the globe that I'd love to just touch base on quickly to paint a bit of a clearer picture of what microvolunteering can actually mean in action. What we saw very recently was the Cancer Society here in New Zealand delivered a wonderful campaign challenging their supporters and their community to engage in a small activity or in a microvolunteering activity every day for a month. The activities included things like collecting scarves and beanies and hats and getting people to donate them to their local Cancer Society office. Internationally, perhaps the most prominent example of microvolunteering is a platform called Be My Eyes. They do wonderful work where they match up sighted volunteers who can go online and participate in a video call and help blind or low vision people to kind of complete daily tasks and live independently. As for some of the microvolunteering activities that we have done at the Microvolunteering Collective, what we're really passionate about and is central to what we do is bringing communities together to share in a community-focused volunteering experience. If we can pop to the next slide, one of those examples is called Love Letters. That is where we get blank pieces of A4 paper, a whole heap of colouring pens and crayons and whatever other craft supplies we can find. And we spend some time drawing out block letters, so you can see an X on the left-hand side of the screen, and then colouring them in, making them look gorgeous, decorating them. We'll then gather them up and donate them to Starship Hospital up in Auckland or to other hospitals around the country. And then the children can collect up letters that have come in from people all around New Zealand, and they spell out their name on their wall just to add a splash of colour to their hospital bedroom and brighten up what can be a very dull and challenging experience in the hospital. Another example is SPCA toys. Got some pictures on the next slide, thank you. So what we do for that one is gather up old materials, old towels and jeans and clothing and whatnot, cut it up into pieces and then braid it and make it into dog toys. Or what's on the screen there is knitting or pom-pom making. And then those are all collected up and we take them to the SPCA so that the animals can use those toys for a little bit of nourishment and nurturing while they wait for their forever homes. Now, my personal favourite example of microvolunteering, I have such a soft spot for this one, is called a postcard picnic. And I'd really like to draw on this one for a moment to demonstrate what I like to call the magic of microvolunteering. Now, for this one, we get together and have a whole bunch of blank cards and postcards. We get out a whole heap of scrapbooking supplies and colouring materials and we decorate the front of those cards. And then we spend some time filling the inside with a message of love, appropriate for a lonely resident in a local rest home. Just something to let them know that we are thinking of them, that there are people out there who are thinking of them amidst what can be quite a lonely time. On the next slide, I've got a photo of a particular postcard picnic. This one happened a couple of years ago, and there were 12 of us. We got together at a workplace in Hamilton, and we spent a lunchtime, which was only 10 minutes long, making cards. We decorated the front and wrote some messages on the inside. For each of us, of course, that 10 minutes of time was a very small investment of our time. Yet in that 10 minutes, each of us wrote, you'll see we're holding on to 1 or 2 cards that we each made. I think there are a couple of people that even made 3, which is 1 or 2 or possibly 3 days that have been brightened. Very cool, awesome effort. We were very proud of that. But between us all, you'll see that we have made about 30 different cards. It still only took each of us 10 minutes, which as I mentioned is nothing compared to an entire day. But between us all, that's 30 different lives that have been brightened or 30 smiles that we've been able to put on different people's faces. At a bigger level, we're seeing growing rates of isolation and loneliness amongst older populations. So this is a really simple activity and a simple way for us to all play a role in addressing that much bigger issue. And it is a simple activity. It's a very small action, but for a lonely rest home resident, that can make the world of difference. And that's exactly why I like to say that micro-volunteering is all about using micro moments to fuel macro change. That really is what a big part of micro-volunteering is. If we could just pop to the next slide there, thank you so much. We're really about considering how we can take these big issues and big, things that we're facing in the world, like growing rates of isolation and loneliness, or just the big pieces of work that we're facing every day in our workplaces, and then break them down into tiny bite-sized pieces, and then mobilize people around that and empower people to offer what they can in ways that work for them. This allows individuals to nourish their well-being, to meet like-minded individuals, to connect with meaningful volunteering in a way that aligns with their needs and counteracts the common barriers that may cause disengagement. And it also allows organizations to access a whole heap of diverse perspectives who may not otherwise have been able to connect or contribute to their mission, and to expand their tribe of change makers who are advocating for their work and championing what they do. I know that you all in the room today represent some incredible organizations, you run some amazing spaces and initiatives, and obviously rely on volunteers to make some of that magic happen. So what I'd really like to challenge you with today is whether you can consider using micro-volunteering to redefine and reimagine what volunteering may look like for you and your organization. Of course, today though, we are here to talk about recruiting and retaining volunteers. So I'll speak to that a little bit more now. And in all honesty, I will start by saying that at the Microvolunteering Collective, we don't really have an active strategy for recruiting and retaining volunteers. And that's because our focus is on creating spaces, opportunities, and platforms for people to contribute, and then allowing them to do so if and when they would like to. Of course, that can be a little bit different to the processes and systems that are often associated with recruitment and retention in more traditional volunteering contexts. Regardless, though, we have kind of learned different things or stumbled across different things that have helped us in being able to engage and build our community of micro-volunteers. And I'd love to share some of those with you in the hopes of maybe you can apply them if you choose to pursue micro-volunteering in some way, or otherwise they might be helpful for other contexts of volunteering. The first one is all about community. Community is everything, really, isn't it? And it certainly is the case with micro-volunteering. Micro-volunteering is all about collective action. So community by nature is at the very heart of that. Unlike what is often seen with more traditional volunteering, we are not about finding a particular person with a particular skill set to come in and fill a particular gap. We're more about building an entire community around us of passionate people who want to make a difference, and then just providing them with the ability to kind of harness and channel and tap into that when they want to. For us, it's been conversation that has been what has enabled us to build community more than anything else. So it's been about connecting with people the entire way through our journey and finding out, what does volunteering mean to them? What does community contribution mean to them? What unique barriers and challenges do they face? And then from there, is micro-volunteering something that resonates? And is it something that can help them overcome those barriers and challenges? From there, it's all about creating a space for community to come together. Micro-volunteering is very much about shared community-driven experiences where a group of people, whether it's a big group or a small group, can come together and share in something that's held at the heart, with the belief that all of those small efforts from each person there will add up. When we started as a club on campus, we held an event every fortnight. Now we operate a little bit more online, and we do so every couple of months. And either way, it's really about us creating that opportunity and then inviting people to come and share in that space if they want to. And I choose those words, if they want to, very intentionally, because another part that is key is allowing people to come and go. There is very much a sense of flow associated with micro-volunteering, And what we've found, as I'm sure is the case in many volunteering contexts, is that there are some people who have come and connected with us once and then they've tapped out, and that's totally fine. We've had some other people who have come along and been part of pretty much every microvolunteering opportunity that we have offered from the very beginning. And then the majority sit somewhere in the middle, and they kind of come and go and tap in and out as they need to, depending on their personal capacity, but also what they're needing and looking for in that moment. Also key is meeting people where they are. Microvolunteering is about removing barriers, and common barriers when it comes to volunteering are associated with time and place. That was kind of what drove us to start the microvolunteering at the very beginning. As I mentioned, it was facing those barriers and talking to students and realizing that students either don't want or don't have the ability or struggle to, for example, leave campus and go into a particular place and volunteer in that traditional sense. So our very first focus was, all right, then we'll bring the volunteering to you. We'll do something on campus. And over time that's evolved. Through COVID, that became online. It was, okay, how can we have online events? How can we create digital opportunities for volunteering? More recently, we've been talking to organizations and looking at how we can provide resources for them to do a little bit of microvolunteering during lunch breaks, for example. Or we've been talking to schools and finding out how can we bring microvolunteering opportunities within the school so that everyone has access to the benefits that come with community contribution, rather than just those who are kind of lucky enough to be able to do so outside of school. So with that, it's just kind of constantly questioning, how can we make this easier than ever? Another thing that's been important is focusing on the experience. One thing that's quite unique to microvolunteering is that it enables people to contribute to a variety of causes, even in a tiny way, which can often be quite a contrast to more traditional forms of volunteering, where often someone will be very loyal to one particular organization or to a small number of organizations. What we've found in our own experiences is that people absolutely care about the cause and they care about, the reason why, but that's not the only reason that they come and they engage with us. What they're also looking for is kind of the package around it. They're wanting connection, or they're wanting something to do, or they're wanting to just get those warm fuzzies inside that you get when you help a community out. So we try and keep that in mind, and I certainly recommend it. I think it's common kind of best practice within any volunteering experiences. How can you amplify the package that comes around it? Keep the cause at the center, but how can you also make the experience so fun and make people feel so special in that moment that they do want to come back and connect with you, whether it's straight away or whether it's at a completely different time and in a way that works for them. Finally, we've found that keeping people close to the impact has been really powerful. I know that in my own experiences with previous volunteering, I've sometimes felt like I'm a very small piece of the puzzle, and it's hard to see, how am I making a difference here? Where are my efforts actually going? So what we try and do with microvolunteering is flip that on its head and give a microvolunteer complete control and complete creative freedom over a particular task. We looked at love letters and SPCA toys and whatnot earlier. The thing with those is that people come in and they spend 10 or 20 minutes and they make something of their very own, and then they know exactly where that goes and how it's going to help someone. Where possible, we also try and invite people in to see that impact. With the postcard picnics, prior to COVID, we often did delivery trips as well to local rest homes. So we'd take the same students who had made the cards into the rest home so that they could give them out and really see tangibly in front of them the difference that they had been making. Obviously, in some cases, that's just not possible, but being able to kind of collect and gather stories and information about that impact and then reflect it back is, a good, powerful option in response there. Finally, I'd just like to say that microvolunteering certainly isn't here to replace volunteering. Volunteering plays such an important role in who we are as a community and as a country. Microvolunteering is intended to be complementary to that. what research has shown over recent years is that people are kind of leaning towards more periodic, episodic ways of volunteering. And I think it makes sense. We live in a very busy world now. So being able to use microvolunteering as another option, complementary to volunteering, for a way for people to make a difference is just kind of the overall focus there, and providing people with a platform to connect in a way that matters to them. And in doing so, we hope to create some win-win outcomes where individuals, organizations, and communities as a whole can enhance their well-being. So that's pretty much me for microvolunteering. I hope that it's offered a little bit of insight and maybe a bit of a different approach that could be considered within your own organizations. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Chantelle. That was awesome. And it's quite cool, actually. I've been seeing a lot of micro-volunteering kind of initiatives here in Christchurch as well, which harken back to my oh, wow, that was at uni. And I loved how you were saying, I think you and Peter had very similar kind of themes in terms of what people want in terms of volunteering, which is that community, that flexibility, and that purpose. So really seeing the impact of how they're helping the organizations. We have just one question for Peter, actually, before we wrap up the session. Carm's just asked, do you have a budget for providing resources for student volunteer army events or workshops? If you don't, how do you work around having a low or no budget? So yeah, how do you fund these events?
So no, not really. We don't really have a budget for that kind of thing. Often it's making use of opportunities that kind of naturally occur. So even if it's just a case of hanging on to people at the end of the day's volunteering to have a bit of a chat or offer to go for a beer or a coffee or something kind of somewhere else where it's not necessarily an SVA funded thing, but it's something that people associate with the activity. The other solution that I've seen to work in the past on kind of bigger scale events, if you want to do those kind of volunteer thank yous, is if there's a new restaurant in the area or a new coffee shop or something like that, where they're looking to kind of for that advertising opportunity to potentially generate some new customers. Sometimes businesses and cafes and things will either sponsor space or sponsor kind of coffee or food or some snacks and things to go towards it, or just the raw materials potentially even to go in it, or a bring your own. If you ask all the volunteers to kind of bring a dish and just a bit of a family style table share is quite an easy way to do it on a bit of a budget.
Thanks, Peter. Awesome. That was a very insightful session. Thank you again, Peter and Chantelle, for joining us. Especially, I mean, you guys are doing this out of the kindness of your hearts as well. So this is awesome to see people who really care about our community and wanting to help out and galvanizing people to do the same. So it's amazing. Thank you so much for all the work that you do. So before we wrap up, we'd love to invite you to our community venue Facebook group. We saw this need of connecting people, especially in community venues with unique challenges. So it's run by community venues for community venues. We started the group, but it's not a SpacetoCo thing. It's for you. So just look at, we'll send you the slide so you can see the link, and just join there. And we're very excited. The next webinar will be on the 28th of June. It's all about how to make people feel at home and welcome in your venue, which is an important topic, especially if you want to have people come to your space. You could even, I was just thinking, Chantelle, maybe a micro-volunteering sort of initiative could have people come in and maybe do up the space a little bit if they had some time. Or so I'm really excited about this. It's probably more of a creative kind of session as well. But yeah, once again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Chantelle. And have a great rest of your day.